With U.S. President-elect Donald Trump threatening to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, China is ready to lead global climate efforts. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. It was just 1 year ago when the United States and China pledged to lead the fight against climate change at the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris. But what a difference a year makes. Come January, Donald Trump is set to become the next president of the United States. An outspoken climate change skeptic, Mr. Trump is threatening to pull out of the Paris Accord when he takes office. For its part, China has made clear it intends to move ahead with or without the United States. We get more now from CCTV's Xiao Lingfeng in Beijing. And Lingfeng, President-elect Trump says the science of climate change remains an open question. Nobody knows if it's real. In the past, he's called it a hoax invented by China. What's Beijing's reaction to Mr. Trump's skepticism?
Well, and China's top climate change negotiator, who's also Vice Foreign Minister Liu Zhenming, rejected Donald Trump's view during the climate change talks held in Morocco last month. He said China could not have invented global warming as a hoax, given that it was Donald Trump's Republican predecessors, namely the Reagan and the senior Bush administration, who started climate negotiations in the 1980s. That was even before China knew that talks to reduce pollution were starting. And prior to Liu's comment, President Xi Jinping had underlined the importance of cooperation between China and the U.S. when he spoke to Donald Trump after the U.S. election. President Xi said China is expecting that developed countries, including the U.S., will continue to lead the way in mitigating climate change, but she also stressed that China will continue its own fight against climate change, whatever the circumstances. And the Chinese negotiators have also said they will stick to initiatives here at home to curb emissions and expand cooperation with developing countries to combat global warming.
Now, China has taken the lead in global renewable investment and is on track at cutting CO2 emissions further. Give us a few examples of what China is doing to reduce greenhouse gases and make the move towards a low-carbon future.
China has been the world's top investor in renewable energy 4 years in a row. Last year, it spent $111 billion into the sector. That's a third of the world's total, nearly the combined total of the US and Europe. Meanwhile, China also led the world in installed wind power, solar power, and hydropower with a total renewable capacity of 500 gigawatts, compared with 220 gigawatts by the US. It's therefore no surprise to hear that China is currently the world's leading manufacturer and exporter of both wind turbines and solar panels. Though the country remains very dependent on coal, it is cutting its fossil fuel emissions output by 0.5% this year versus 0.7% in 2015. And next year, Beijing is poised to open a nationwide carbon emissions trading program. When completed, it will be the biggest in the world. With all these efforts together, China is pushing very hard on its agenda to see its carbon emissions peak by 2030 as part of its national commitments to the Paris Agreement. Back to you, Anand.
Thanks, Lingfeng. That's CCTV's Xiao Lingfeng reporting from Beijing. Let's get to our panel. Joining us from New Delhi is Arunabha Ghosh. He's the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, a leading South Asia policy research organization. With us here in Washington is Ma Tianji. He's the Beijing managing editor for China Dialogue, an independent website focusing on environmental issues. Andrew Light is a distinguished senior fellow in the Global Climate Program at the World Resources Institute. And joining us from New York is Barbara Fenimore. She is the senior attorney and Asia director for the China Program at the National Resources Defense Council. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Barbara, let me start with you. Given the threat by President-elect Donald Trump to pull out of the Paris Accord, what kind of challenge will that pose for a country like China, which has said that it will now have to take the lead in combating climate change?
Well, China has said that it is committed to moving ahead with climate change, regardless of what the United States does, that it is in the best interests of world leaders to follow global trends, which are to move towards clean energy. And China is responsible for over a quarter of total global greenhouse gas emissions and really holds the key to the future of our global climate. So it's going to be challenging for China now that the United States at least has said in principle that they will reconsider the Paris Agreement. We will wait and see about that. The U.S. is going to move ahead, actually, regardless of what happens in Washington, because of the strong programs that are going on, will continue to go on in states and cities. Nonetheless, it's going to be really incumbent on China to take that leadership role because that's the future of our planet.
Andrew, President-elect Trump has nominated a number of climate change skeptics to his administration. There are reports also that he will nominate Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, who is a leading climate change denier, to his administration as energy secretary. In all, there are 9 senior members of the transition team who are skeptics. What does this tell you about where the United States is going? I mean, is it going to pull out of all climate change efforts?
We don't know yet. We don't know where they're going. Donald Trump has also said he's considering and looking into the issue. I think it's in some respects, we need to wait and sort of see what the administration is going to do, but at the same time be very prepared, given who they are staffing up within the administration at the cabinet level and lower down, for an onslaught, for a big push both against the domestic regulations that President Obama has put in place that allow us to reduce our emissions and meet the commitments that we've put out under the Paris Agreement, and also to continue to defend really the importance, the viability of the Paris Agreement itself and why the United States should remain in it. So we've got to remain, I think, vigilant just because of the profile of the people that he has put in place.
Tianji, Chinese officials have made it clear that China will pursue its own interests for a low-carbon future. What is your view on this? I mean, how big a challenge is it going to be for Beijing?
I think currently the Chinese climate policy is driven largely by domestic concerns. So I would consider some of the key policies robust with a high level of public support and also a commitment from top leadership. For example, we all know that China is now very much concerned with the air pollution situation. So a move away from fossil fuel sources such as coal as a primary energy source would actually solve and reduce air pollution, but at the same time actually reduce China's carbon emissions. So the Chinese government, the top leadership has made commitments through their 13th five-year plan, which is the blueprint for the next 5 years of the country's socio-economic issues, and has embedded a lot of the key elements of its climate policy in that kind of high-level government plan. So I would think that China is on the right trajectory to move the country towards a low-carbon future.
Arunaba, how damaging would it be if the United States does indeed pull out of the Paris Accord?
From a global perspective, of course, it's damaging because the Paris Agreement is a capstone of about 25 years of negotiations that brings every country, rich or poor, small or big, around the table, and every country coming and saying that we are going to do something about it. Now, obviously, what countries have committed so far is not sufficient to keep us under 2 degrees, but it's a significant step forward from what we had going on in the past. So if the world's largest historical emitter and the current second largest emitter pulls out, then obviously it sends a different signal altogether of what global collective action means. But on the ground, is it damaging? I'm not sure. Because just like China has its own interests, India has its own interests as well. Whether it's energy access, energy security, energy efficiency, we see value in a cleaner energy transition, even as we temporarily get onto a cleaner coal path and then natural gas, even as we build out one of the largest and most dynamic renewable energy markets. So there is an internal logic to this. There is a market dynamic to this. There is a technological shift that's going on, none of which can be denied, whether you deny climate science or not. So I think the United States has to ask itself the question, that what signal does it want to send? Is it only a signal about multilateral negotiations, or is it also denying the way energy markets are moving? And if it's denying that, then it's losing out on business opportunities that other countries like China and India might grab.
Barbara, on the question of what signal the United States wants to send, Donald Trump has described climate change as a hoax which has been perpetrated by the Chinese for economic advantages. China has, of course, denied this. But Is this an indication of where he's going here? He's going to put business and the business of making money above climate change.
Donald Trump has said that he wants to move back to the coal use and oil use of the 19th century, claiming that that will create millions of jobs and raise income. But the fact of the matter is coal use is declining in the United States. Utilities, states and cities realize that they have to move ahead if they want to create jobs, if they want to have a sustainable economy. They have to move to the clean energy of the 21st century. So if Donald Trump really wants to make America great again, he will not choose to opt out of the clean energy revolution, which is going to move ahead because the markets demand it, because utilities are making long-term investments recognizing that carbon is going to be regulated, needs to be regulated. They are shutting down coal plants. They're not going to open them up again. But the way of the future is really what China is doing, is trying to transition away from its dependence on coal towards clean energy and using its funding to create jobs, to help workers make that transition to clean energy jobs, which are numerous. China actually leads the world right now in clean jobs on renewable energy, about 3.5 million jobs. That's the way for the United States to go as well.
Andrew, those targets that they talked about in the Paris Accord, keeping the rise in temperatures to below 2 degrees Celsius, above pre-industrial levels, what happens if the U.S. pulls out to those targets?
Well, the U.S. alone is not going to completely derail hitting those targets, but it does depend on what is the impact. If the U.S. pulls out, first of all, if the U.S. dismantles our domestic regulations that are right now the thing that are really keeping us moving in the right direction, along with the business environment that it's set, completely agree with all of that. But if this does have a follow-on effect on other countries, that they start reducing their targets as well or reducing their ambition, then we could potentially be seeing a cascading effect, which could be quite damaging. Now, I personally think that what's going to happen is that given what states and cities are doing and what the business environment is in the United States, the growth of renewable energy jobs, the direction of travel, that the United States will still probably hit maybe the low end of its target for 2025 that it's put into the Paris Agreement, no matter what the new incoming administration does. I think it does put us in a very bad place, though, for increasing our ambition, say by 2030, to get to even greater reductions, or indeed achieving an 80% reduction in emissions by 2050, which is what the current White House has said that's what we should do, and as you recently released a report during the last UN climate negotiations just a few weeks ago on what the pathway for that would be, which just means that it's going to be more expensive for the U.S. to eventually catch up when we get back into the game. And again, that could have some kind of effect on the rest of the world. I hope not. But I hope Aranaba is right about this. The other countries will see that it is in their self-interest, their best interest, to continue moving forward in the way that they have said that they would.
Right. Tianji, Donald Trump seems to come at this issue from a point of it's either economic growth or combating climate change. It's an either-or situation. It doesn't have to be. China has shown that it can be both, can't it?
Exactly. I think China is a very good example of showing how its environmental goals can be aligned with economic goals, right? China is currently trying to figure out ways to move away from its reliance on heavy industry in infrastructure investment as the engine of economic growth. And you're seeing big progress in that aspect in recent years, where the percentage of service as a contribution to the general growth of the economy is significant. We're seeing a decoupling, for example, of energy use and economic growth. We are still seeing over 6% of annual economic growth, but with a flat or much reduced reliance on energy and electricity consumption, which shows that you can actually decouple carbon emissions from economic growth.